All right, so we're diving into something kind of different this time. A deep dive request that I think is close to a lot of our hearts, Oasis. But
Mm.
you haven't just requested a typical band deep dive, have you?
Right, yeah. Our listeners grappling with what Oasis represents, like their music's connection to bigger ideas,
Mm-hmm.
like cultural moments, and also, frankly, how their sound still hits so hard, especially now.
Yeah.
It's
Okay, so less about dissecting guitar solos and more about, what do they call it, uplifting tunes with menacing delivery.
exactly. They're wrestling with this contrast, that classic Oasis sound,
Yeah.
big anthems
Okay.
with an underlying edge, which actually gets us to a key point in their reflection. This idea of longing as a central theme in Oasis's music and
Mhm.
how that resonated with them.
Interesting because they specifically mention listening to Be Here Now constantly as a teenager. Is it too much of a stretch to say there's a longing for connection there? Like they're finding solace in the music itself?
Not at all. Music can be incredibly powerful that way.
Yeah.
It gives you a language for feelings you might not even have words for yet.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about their teenage years, that feeling of wanting something more,
Mm.
well, it's universal.
Yeah.
But Oasis had a way of making it feel urgent, almost desperate.
And let's not forget they mentioned listening to Dylan and Christian rock too. You don't usually see those on the same playlist. Does that suggest a certain sensitivity to this idea of searching for something more, even if it takes different forms?
Absolutely. They're coming to Oasis with an ear for lyrical depth,
Hmm.
for artists who aren't afraid to tackle big questions. So it's not just about a catchy tune. It's about what that tune evokes, the emotions it stirs up, and how those resonate with their own experiences and longings.
And speaking of searching, they also touched on this idea of Oasis as a voice of rebellion,
Yeah.
especially for the working class, which, I
Mm.
mean, makes sense, right? Their whole vibe just screams that we're not going to take it energy.
Yeah.
But I'm curious what you think makes music such a potent outlet for those feelings of frustration, of being let down by the world around you.
It's like music gives a voice to the unspoken.
Yeah.
It's raw, it's emotional, and it can articulate a shared experience in a way that talking about it just can't. For a lot of people, especially those who feel unheard, that kind of shared rebellion in music is incredibly validating. It's like finally someone gets it.
Totally. And with Oasis, it wasn't just about the music. It was their whole attitude, their background, their willingness to call things out.
Right.
They reflected a specific kind of disillusionment that was really prevalent, especially, like you said, for people who felt like their voices weren't being heard. But then there's the whole other layer.
The self-destruction.
Exactly. They were notorious for it, and eventually it tore them apart.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because our listener picked up on that too. They even used the phrase tragic arc to describe the band's journey.
Wow.
Almost like that rebellion, however necessary, can also become a trap in itself.
Yeah. It's that classic question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can you rage against the machine forever? Or does something have to give eventually? And maybe that's where this reunion comes in.
Okay.
'Cause our listener didn't just stop at the breakup, did they? They seemed surprisingly hopeful about it.
It's almost like they see the reunion as a chance for some kind of redemption. Like maybe this time around things could be different, especially with the whole thing about Noel maybe finding faith like Liam. They seem to be really fascinated by that possibility.
It's as if they're looking for a parallel between the band's journey and a kind of personal growth,
Mm.
a search for meaning. Remember how they talked about finding solace in Be Here Now as a teenager? What if they're hoping for a new kind of solace now? One that reflects a more mature understanding of the world and maybe even a spiritual dimension.
Okay, so we've got this listener who found a voice in Oasis's rebellion, felt the weight of their self-destruction, and now at this reunion seems to be hoping for something more, some, dare I say, deeper.
Right.
But what does that even look like? Especially because they were very clear about wanting them to avoid the pitfalls of, and I quote, Christian rock.
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting because it's one thing for a band to tap into anger or frustration,
Yeah.
but exploring faith out, searching for meaning,
Yeah.
that requires a different level of vulnerability.
And let's be honest, vulnerability hasn't exactly been their strong suit. But I hear you. There's a difference between like surface level preaching and actually wrestling with those bigger questions in your music, which honestly makes me think about their love for Dylan. There's a guy who never shied away from exploring the spiritual side of things, even when it got messy.
Exactly. And doing it authentically without becoming predictable or preachy. That's the real challenge. It's about bringing that same rawness and honesty that drew our listener to the music in the first place.
Totally.
They even said they were hoping for something that went beyond the typical Christian rock tropes.
So what are we thinking? What would authentically Oasis spirituality even sound like?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one only the Gallagher brothers can answer.
Yeah.
But if we think about their strengths,
Hmm.
that raw energy, the sharp social commentary, the undeniable hooks,
Yeah.
imagine all of that channeled into songs that grapple with faith, doubt, even disillusionment, but with a glimmer of hope woven through.
Something that acknowledges the darkness but doesn't get swallowed by it. Kind of like coming full circle. Back to that longing we talked about, but with years of experience and maybe even a little wisdom mixed in.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe that's the kind of evolution our listener was hoping for all along. Not just a reunion tour,
Yeah.
but a creative rebirth, a soundtrack for a different stage of life
Yeah.
where those big questions take on new meaning.
Man, talk about a deep dive. So to our listener and to all of you out there, maybe this reunion is more than just a nostalgia trip. Maybe it's a chance for all of us to reflect on our own journeys, our own searches for meaning, and who knows, maybe Oasis will give us the soundtrack for that too. Until next time, keep diving deep.